we now have the top sheet rounded over. We have the sidewall nice and smooth. We have a lot of this material above the sidewall removed. And now what we want to start doing is putting the angle on the edge that we're looking for. Typically, if you're racing at a junior level, your knees and a lot of your joints and muscles haven't fully developed. You don't want to go with an angle that's too aggressive. It'll make your skis a little too sharp. They'll end up being hooky and you can actually do some damage on your knees. So anyone at the 9-10 age would normally go with a 90-degree angle. Anyone 11-12 might go to an 89-degree angle. And 12, 13, 14, you would probably go to an 87-degree angle. You'd never go any more than that unless you got to the World Cup. Even though you're at 87 degrees, you're always 87 degrees tipped in slightly. Okay, so it allows you that float on the snow. So in this particular case, this is a men's 165 slalom ski, so we'll go with a 3-degree. So what we're doing right now is using a very aggressive file, a little bit more of a setup file. And this is already set, so that when we put the file in here with the spring clamp, we're getting a perfect 87-degree or 3-degree angle. Okay. Same as the sidewall plane, we're just starting at the tip, and with relatively short passes, overlapping, just removing that material. At this point in time, you want to be very careful. Your edges now have a very sharp burr on them, so it's very important that you put as little pressure as you can and let the tool do a lot of the work. If you add too much pressure, you'll start to develop some wobbles in the edge, and you always run the risk of that slipping and cutting your hand pretty seriously. Always better to do more passes with less pressure than few passes with a lot of pressure. And with this, again, you'll see those curly pieces of material coming off, but they're much finer. Typically when you're doing this, we're starting with a 90-degree angle on this edge, and we're beveling that to an 87-degree angle. So we'll tend to hit the bottom part of the edge first and slowly work our way in. Over time, you can look at the edge and you can tell by the shine that's on the edge whether you've actually hit that portion of the edge or not. If you're at all unsure about that, just take a black marker and run it down the length of the edge. When you see the black marker's been taken off, you know you've hit the whole edge. Okay. And with the setup file, we've removed the bulk of the material, and just try and do a few longer passes just to make sure it's very consistent with very, very light pressure. Okay, there we go. And now we go to a second cut file, which is one with just a little smaller tooth on it. When we're using a file, it tears at the metal and it makes a lot of striations or burrs that are hanging off the edge. If you go with a smaller file, it makes those burrs quite a bit smaller. Okay, so this is smoothing out the first step that we did. Okay, and then if it's available to you, you go with the third file, and this again is even finer, and that's about it. To get used to it, I really would suggest using a marker to make sure that you've hit the entire edge, and making sure that you've got all that excess material out of the way. Okay, you can see that you now have a very clean edge. The titanal layer that you've removed with your sidewall plane at this point should be very shiny. The actual edge material should almost have a dull finish to it. When we started, the edge was very shiny, and we've taken a lot of that luster out, so it's actually quite a bit dull. Because we've been tearing at this material with a file, the edges are quite rough, there's quite a few burrs, and we have to remove a lot of those burrs. What we want to do now is with a medium stone, get the burr so it's coming back up this direction. And what a burr is it's this point that's hanging above the edge. And we want to just work that back and forth until it becomes smaller and it's a heavier burr that's just sitting down slightly. So we'll take a medium grit stone, diamond stone. Always make sure that these are wet. If you've got some sort of a thinner that you can add with your water, this will just help to ensure that you don't have any clog with any wax or any other materials that are on the base. With this, what you're doing is you're just resting it on the base flat, and you'll see a gap between the stone and the edge itself. And when you see that that space is closed, then you're just lightly running it. Very, very little pressure. Just trying to remove that lip and force the lip up this direction. Okay. So we've done that with this stone. Very little pressure. Now we're going to a slightly heavier grit stone. And this we'll just use with this guide, just because it's a little bit easier in terms of support. And now we're not only forcing the lip to go this direction, but we're actually polishing that base. And just like you would polish a table that you were making, or sand a table, you would start with a heavy grit sandpaper and go to something that's a little bit finer. So through this process, we're just going to finer stones. And slowly polishing that. Going finer once again. We'll hit the base layer, or the base edge. If you're competitive with your skis, you definitely don't want to remove this lip altogether. A recreational skier may want the lip taken off, and that will give them a smoother, longer lasting edge. But anyone racing definitely wants to have that lip. They just want to make sure that that lip is very thick and strong and it's pointed in this direction. There we go. At this point, the ski is extremely sharp, but the edge is very clean. The last stone that we use is called a gum stone, and this is a very hardened rubber compound. And this is for just taking out some of the oxidized material that's been pushed into the edge. And at the tip and tail, this can just feather it in and make it a little bit smoother. Okay. So at this point, we have a very clean edge. It feels much like a razor blade, but at the same point in time, pretty comfortable in running my hand down there, knowing that I'm not going to cut it, because that burr that I've created on there is very, very smooth.